It seems like everywhere I turn these days, music is just blending languages together. I mean, you've got Bad Bunny switching between Spanish and English like it's nothing.
Right.
You've got BTS singing in Korean and English and hitting these massive global audiences.
Yeah.
Even Stromae, throwing in some Dutch alongside the French. It's like this whole new world is opening up.
It really is. And I think for anyone listening, it doesn't matter if you're a musician or just someone who loves music.
Yeah.
This whole idea of multilingual music, it's like this incredible window into how sound and creativity are evolving.
I completely agree. And what we're going to try to do in this deep dive is give you the tools to understand not just the fact that languages are blending in music, but the specifics of how it's happening.
Yeah.
Like, what are the techniques? What are the choices that artists are making?
Exactly. And even more importantly, we want to think about how you could use some of these techniques yourself.
Exactly. This isn't just about observation. It's about empowering you to be more creative and to really listen with a more informed ear. So we'll be digging into things like how languages are integrated, how code switching works in songs, what's going on in the minds of these bilingual artists.
Right.
And the really fascinating interplay between phonetics and rhythm across different languages.
Absolutely. And of course, we'll be looking at the big picture, the artistic impact of all of this.
Definitely. And as we explore these different facets, the big question we want you to keep in mind as you listen is, have you ever heard a song that seamlessly moves between languages and thought, how on earth did they pull that off?
Yeah.
Or maybe even, could I try that in my own music? If that sounds familiar, then this deep dive is tailor-made for you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's jump right into it. First up, linguistic integration and code switching in music.
Yeah.
So it's not just like casually chatting with a friend in two different languages, right?
Yeah.
There's a real art to it when it comes to songwriting.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. In everyday conversations, switching between languages, it's often almost unconscious, right?
Yeah, totally.
You do it based on habit, who you're talking to, that kind of thing. But in music, it's intentional. It's a deliberate compositional choice, like a painter choosing a specific color or a sculptor choosing a particular material.
Right.
That language becomes part of the texture, part of the meaning. There's been some really interesting research lately that really highlights this intentional aspect of code switching in music. It's all about the effect that the artist wants to create for the listener.
That makes a lot of sense. And a great example of this is Burna Boy. The way he blends Pidgin English, Yoruba, and Jamaican patois. It's not just random. It feels like such a powerful statement.
Absolutely.
So for those of you out there who are writing songs, how can you start thinking about using different languages or dialects in this way, with that same kind of purpose and impact?
That's a great question. I think a good starting point is to really consider the languages or dialects that you're drawn to and think about their inherent qualities. Like, what kind of feelings do they evoke in you? What are the associations you have with them? Do they connect to specific cultural contexts, memories, maybe even aspects of a story you want to tell?
I see what you mean.
Think about Burna Boy again. He uses that mix of languages to create this sense of Pan-African identity. Could you use languages in a similar way?
Right.
Like to represent different parts of a character's personality or different themes in your song or even different facets of your own identity as an artist. It's about going beyond just translation and thinking about the symbolic power of each language.
That's really insightful. And it makes me wonder, for artists who are bilingual, do you think there's almost a cognitive advantage? Like it opens up different creative pathways in their brains?
That's a really interesting point. And there's actually some fascinating research in neuroscience that suggests exactly that. Being bilingual isn't just about knowing two sets of vocabulary. It actually seems to enhance cognitive flexibility. Studies have shown that bilingual individuals have heightened activity in the brain regions associated with creativity, particularly in areas related to what are called executive functions, things like switching between tasks and thinking outside the box.
So it's almost like their brains are more agile when it comes to creativity.
Precisely. Think of it like a mental workout that strengthens your ability to approach songwriting from multiple angles. And even if you're not fluent in another language, even just dabbling in it, exploring its structures and sounds can be a really valuable exercise. It can push you beyond the familiar limitations of your native language and maybe spark ideas you wouldn't have had otherwise.
That's really encouraging. It's like even just dipping your toes in could lead to some unexpected creative breakthroughs. Can you give us an example of how that might play out, like in terms of finding new metaphors or rhythmic ideas?
Absolutely. So different languages often have very unique ways of framing concepts and expressing imagery. A metaphor that's totally common in one language might not have a direct equivalent in another, or it might have completely different connotations. By engaging with another language, you kind of open yourself up to these alternative ways of thinking, which can then inspire new and original metaphors in your songwriting, even when you're back in your primary language. And on a rhythmic level, every language has its own natural cadence and stress patterns. So exploring those can introduce you to rhythms that are outside the typical rhythms of your native tongue, which can lead to more interesting and varied musical phrasing.
Okay, so we've talked about the deliberate choice of language and the potential cognitive benefits. Now let's get into the technical side of actually weaving these languages together in a song. How do phonetics, the sounds of words, and prosody, the rhythm and intonation, come into play?
This is where things get really interesting, especially when you're dealing with languages that have very different phonetic or prosodic features from your own. Take tonal languages, for example, like Mandarin Chinese.
Hmm.
In Mandarin, the pitch you use to pronounce a syllable isn't just about melody, it actually changes the meaning of the word.
Wow, so it's not just musical, it's actually part of the language itself.
Exactly. So if you're trying to incorporate Mandarin lyrics into a song with a non-tonal musical framework, you have to be incredibly careful that your melody doesn't accidentally change what the words are supposed to mean.
So singing a word on the wrong pitch could actually change what you're saying.
Exactly. You could completely change the meaning without even realizing it. Artists like Jay Chou, who often incorporates Mandarin into his music, he's very meticulous about aligning the melody with the natural tones of the language. But if those tones clash, let's say a word that has a rising tone is sung on a falling melodic phrase, the meaning of the lyric can get totally distorted. This is why if you're working with a language you're not fluent in, especially a tonal language, it's absolutely crucial to consult with native speakers, maybe even linguistic experts, to make sure you're getting it right.
That's a level of detail I never would have thought about. It's like the language itself already has its own built-in melody.
Hmm.
What about non-tonal languages like English and Korean? How do they interact in a song? I mean, BTS's Dynamite is a great example of a multilingual hit.
Dynamite is a fantastic example, and it really showcases something called prosodic synergy. Korean has what's called a Moraic rhythm. It's syllable timed, which means that each syllable gets roughly the same amount of time. English, on the other hand, has a stress-timed rhythm, where the stress syllables are more prominent and the time between stress syllables is relatively consistent regardless of how many unstressed syllables are in between. What BTS does really well is they adapt English words and phrases to fit that Korean prosodic structure. They might tweak the pronunciation a little bit or compress some syllables, but it still feels natural in the flow of the Korean language while remaining understandable to English speakers. This creates a kind of hybrid rhythm where the patterns of the two languages blend together in a way that's catchy and linguistically coherent within the song.
So for a songwriter who's experimenting with different languages, but non-tonal languages, the challenge and the opportunity lie in playing with those inherent stress patterns and syllable timings to create these unique rhythms that work with the music.
Exactly. It's about paying attention to how the natural flow of each language interacts with the song's tempo and the beat. Experiment with putting stressed syllables on the strong beats, or using the natural flow of one language to create syncopation against the underlying rhythm of the song. It's all about finding that balance where the rhythm of the language and the rhythm of the music enhance each other to create something more dynamic and engaging for the listener.
So we've covered some of the technical aspects. Now let's zoom out and look at the broader artistic implications. How does blending languages contribute to the overall cultural and aesthetic dimensions of a song?
Well, integrating different languages can really add layers of depth and texture to a song's artistic identity. It can immediately signal a connection to specific cultures or communities. Think about an artist who incorporates their heritage language into a song that's otherwise in English. It can be a powerful way to express their identity and connect with listeners who share that linguistic background.
Right, it's like bringing in a whole other dimension of who they are.
Exactly. And aesthetically, the unique sounds and rhythms of different languages can introduce fresh sonic palettes into a song. It can make it stand out, make it more globally appealing.
It's like adding another layer of artistry on top of the melody and the harmony.
Exactly. And even for listeners who don't understand the words, the sound of a language can evoke certain feelings or create a particular atmosphere. The way a language flows, its inherent musicality, all of that contributes to the overall aesthetic impact of the song.
So it's not just about the dictionary definition of the words, but the feeling and the cultural context that they bring with them.
Absolutely. Think about what each language brings to the table sonically and culturally, and then think about how you can weave those different linguistic threads together to create something richer and more nuanced in your music.
You've given us so much to think about in terms of the technical and artistic considerations. Now let's talk about some concrete strategies for songwriters who are actually looking to blend languages in their music. What are some key techniques they can use?
One technique that I think is really essential is what I call meticulous phonetic planning. Before you even start putting your multilingual lyrics to music, spend some time really analyzing the phonetic characteristics of each language you're going to use. Pay attention to those vowel and consonant sounds that might be unfamiliar in your primary language.
Right.
Practice pronouncing them and think about how they're going to sound when you sing them. And if you're working with a language that you don't speak fluently, this is where collaborating with native speakers is absolutely invaluable. They can give you crucial feedback on your pronunciation and make sure that your phonetic choices are aligned with both the sound and the meaning that you're going for.
So it's about getting the sounds right before you even worry about the music.
Exactly. And another powerful technique is what I call structural linguistic mirroring. This involves consciously creating parallel structures or themes across the different languages in your song.
Okay, I'm interested. Tell me more.
So, for example, you might have a verse in one language that explores a specific idea or emotion, and then a corresponding verse in another language that offers a different perspective on that same theme or expands on it in a new way. This creates a sense of connection and allows the listener to experience the song's message through these different linguistic lenses. It's like building a narrative or an emotional arc that unfolds across the different languages.
That's a really sophisticated approach. It's like using the structure of the language itself to build meaning.
Exactly. And finally, think carefully about the strategic placement of languages within the song's overall structure. Where do you introduce each language? Maybe you have a verse in one language that builds tension, leading to a chorus in another language that provides a sense of release. Or maybe you have a bridge in a third language that offers a completely contrasting perspective. The placement should be deliberate and serve the overall narrative or emotional flow of your song. It's really helpful to analyze successful multilingual songs and pay attention to how the artists use different languages within their compositions.
So it's not just what languages you use, but where and how you use them within the architecture of the song.
Absolutely. It's about creating a cohesive and meaningful experience where each linguistic element plays a specific role in the overall impact of the song.
We've really covered a lot of ground here, from that initial spark of an idea to the really technical aspects of phonetics and structure. It's clear that blending languages and music is a really thoughtful and complex process.
It is. And for you, the listener, the potential songwriter out there, the key takeaway is that by understanding those technical details, the phonetics, the prosody, and by really thinking about the structure and the artistic implications of your choices, you can approach multilingual songwriting with more confidence and skill.
At the end of the day, it's about recognizing that each language has its own power and beauty, and then figuring out how you can weave them together in your own unique way to tell new stories, to evoke different emotions, and to connect with a wider audience on a deeper level. So the final thought we want to leave you with is this. What unique sonic and narrative landscapes could you create by intentionally blending languages in your next song? It's a really exciting frontier for musical exploration.
It really is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.